a single plate of hot cherry pie. That was all it took to permanently alter the trajectory of Jade Monroe's life. When she unlocked the glass door of her struggling Atlanta diner to let in a shivering, starving 7-year-old boy from the freezing rain, she thought she was merely offering a moment of warmth. She was just doing what any decent human being would do. She didn't know the boy was the sole blood heir to the most brutal and secretive biker gang in the South. And she certainly had no idea that his father, a man whose very name made the city's sheriff deputies flinch, was about to kick down her doors, dragging her into a world of beautiful, terrifying darkness. The neon sign above the copper kettle buzzed with a dying, erratic hum, casting long, bruised shadows of red and blue across the wet asphalt of Peachtree Street. It was nearing midnight on a Tuesday in mid-November, and a relentless southern downpour was punishing the city. The rain came down in freezing horizontal sheets, turning the usually bustling streets into a desolate wasteland. Inside the diner, 26-year-old Jade Monroe wiped down the cracked Formica countertop with a bleach-soaked rag. Her shoulders ached with the deep, throbbing exhaustion that only came from working 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week. The diner was a relic, a diner car from the late 70s that had seen better decades, let alone days. But it was hers. It was the only thing her late grandfather had left her, and despite the mounting pile of past due notices stuffed in the register drawer, Jade refused to let it go under. Tony, her grumpy but loyal line cook, emerged from the swinging kitchen doors, untying his grease-stained apron. "I cut the fries, Jade. The storm is getting worse. If we don't lock up now, we're going to be sleeping in the booths. Go ahead and head out, Tony," Jade said, forcing a warm, albeit tired, smile. "I just need to finish mopping the back and cash out the register." "Drive safe." "You too, kid. Don't stay too long," Tony warned, pulling his heavy wool coat tight before stepping out into the howling wind. The bell above the door jingled a frantic goodbye before the heavy glass slammed shut, plunging the diner into a quiet solitude, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of rain against the large front windows. Jade sighed, leaning her hip against the counter. She stared out into the darkness, watching the streetlights reflect off the flooded gutters. That was when she saw him. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a stray dog seeking shelter beneath the diner's striped canvas awning. But as she squinted through the condensation on the glass, the silhouette sharpened into the shape of a child. Jade dropped her rag and hurried to the door. She unlocked the deadbolt and pushed the door open against the howling wind. "Hey," she called out, her voice nearly swallowed by the gale. "Hey, sweetheart, what are you doing out here?" The boy flinched, pressing himself harder against the brick wall. He couldn't have been older than 7. He was wearing a dark, expensive-looking wool coat, but it was thoroughly soaked, clinging to his small frame. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his teeth were chattering so violently Jade could hear them over the rain. But it was his eyes that stopped her in her tracks. Wide, piercing, and startlingly defensive, like a cornered wild animal, he was clutching a small, broken wooden toy motorcycle to his chest, as if his life depended on it. Jade didn't hesitate. She stepped out into the freezing rain, knelt down, and reached out a gentle hand. "You're freezing. Come inside. I have the heat on, and I can make you something to eat." The boy stared at her, his dark eyes darting from her face to the warm, glowing interior of the diner. He didn't speak, but the subtle tremor in his lower lip betrayed his tough exterior. Slowly, he took a tentative step forward. Jade ushered him inside, quickly locking the door behind them. She immediately grabbed a clean, dry towel from the back room and draped it over his trembling shoulders. "Let's get you warmed up," she murmured gently, guiding him to the booth closest to the heating vent. The boy sat rigidly, wrapping the towel tightly around himself. He looked entirely out of place in the shabby diner. Despite the mud and rain, his clothes were undeniably tailored: high-end slacks, a cashmere sweater beneath the coat, and leather shoes that cost more than Jade made in a month. "My name is Jade," she said softly, pouring a mug of hot cocoa and sliding it across the table toward him. "What's your name?" The boy stared at the mug, then up at her. He hesitated for a long time before his tiny voice, hoarse from the cold, finally broke the silence. "Malik. It's nice to meet you, Malik. Are you hungry?" Malik gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Jade smiled. "I've got some leftover brisket, mac and cheese, and the best cherry pie in Atlanta. How does that sound?" A flicker of genuine hunger flashed in Malik's eyes, breaking through his guarded demeanor. He nodded again, a bit more enthusiastically this time. For the next 20 minutes, Jade watched as the boy demolished the plate of food with a ravenous desperation that broke her heart. Whoever this child was, and despite his expensive clothes, he hadn't eaten a proper meal in hours, maybe days. "Where are your parents?" Jade asked gently, sitting in the booth opposite him as he started on the cherry pie. "Do you know your phone number? I can call your mom or dad to come pick you up." At the mention of his parents, Malik stopped eating. He lowered his fork, his small hands gripping the edge of the table. "My mom is in heaven," he said quietly. "And my dad is looking for me." "Did you get lost?" Jade pressed, keeping her tone light so as not to spook him. Malik shook his head, his dark eyes dropping to the table. "I ran away." Jade frowned, concern deepening the lines on her forehead. "Why did you run away, sweetheart?" Before Malik could answer, the heavy rhythmic thunder of multiple Harley engines rumbling to a stop outside rattled the diner's front windows. Jade turned her head. Through the rain-streaked glass, she saw 5 gleaming black and chrome Harleys pull up onto the curb, their headlights aggressively blinding. Malik gasped, instantly sliding out of the booth and diving under the table. "Hide me," he whispered, sheer terror lacing his tiny voice. "Please, Jade, don't let them take me." Jade's protective instincts flared. She didn't know who was on those bikes, but the sheer panic emanating from the 7-year-old under her table told her everything she needed to know. She stood up, smoothing down her apron, and mentally prepared herself for whatever was about to walk through her door. The bell above the door didn't just jingle. It shrieked as the heavy glass door was violently shoved open. The wind howled into the diner, bringing with it 4 massive men. They were built like linebackers, dressed in black leather cuts with the Hell Angel's death head patch, rain-slicked and menacing. Their eyes were cold, scanning the empty booths with terrifying efficiency. Jade's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but she planted her feet firmly behind the counter, blocking their view of the booth where Malik was hiding. "We're closed," Jade said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "If you want coffee, there's a 24-hour gas station 3 blocks down." The men didn't even acknowledge her. One of them, a man with a thick scar running down his jawline, gestured sharply to the others. "Check the back. Check the bathrooms." "Excuse me," Jade shouted, stepping out from behind the counter. "You can't just barge in here. I'm calling the police." She reached for the rotary phone on the counter, but before her fingers could even graze the receiver, a large hand clamped down on the device, severing the line with a sharp, brutal yank. Jade gasped, stepping back as a 5th man entered the diner. The air in the room seemed to instantly drop 10 degrees. The other 4 men immediately stopped their search, straightening their postures in a display of absolute deference. The man who had just walked in was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated an aura of dangerous, suppressed violence. He wore a weathered black leather jacket over a dark tee. the Hell Angels bottom rocker claiming the Southeast Territory, completely dry despite the storm outside. His jaw was clenched tight, a sharp line of granite, and his eyes, a striking icy gray, locked onto Jade with the intensity of a predator assessing prey. This was Jack's Reaper Harlan. Jade didn't know his name, nor did she know that the man standing in her humble diner controlled every underground fight ring, gun run, and corrupted official from Atlanta to Savannah. All she knew was that every alarm bell in her head was screaming at her to run. "Where is he?" Reaper's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that didn't need to be loud to command absolute authority. "I don't know who you're talking about," Jade lied smoothly, lifting her chin. "But you're trespassing. Leave." Reaper took a slow, deliberate step toward her. His heavy motorcycle boots made no sound on the checkered linoleum floor. He stopped mere inches from her, towering over her smaller frame. He smelled of rain, motor oil, leather, and something metallic like gunpowder. "I am not a man who repeats himself, sweetheart," Reaper said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "My brothers tracked him to this block. We saw the lights. I know he is here. Now step aside." "I told you," Jade said, her voice shaking slightly, though she refused to break eye contact. "We are closed. There is no one here but me." Reaper's eyes narrowed. He raised a gloved hand, and for a terrifying second, Jade thought he was going to strike her. Instead, he reached past her, picking up the dirty plate from the counter. The plate that still had a few crumbs of cherry pie and the smear of mac and cheese. "You eat a lot for a woman your size," Reaper observed coldly, dropping the plate back onto the counter with a clatter. "And you drink hot cocoa out of a mug that says World's Best Dad." Jade's breath hitched. She had been careless. Reaper's icy gaze snapped to the booth closest to the heater. He saw the corner of the dry towel draped over the seat. In 2 long strides, he was across the diner. "No, stop!" Jade yelled, rushing forward and throwing herself between Reaper and the table. She shoved her hands against his chest, trying to push him back. It was like pushing against a solid brick wall. Reaper looked down at her hands on his chest, genuine shock flickering in his eyes for a fraction of a second. No one touched him. No one dared. And yet this tiny, exhausted black waitress in a grease-stained apron was willing to physically fight him. "Move," he growled. "You're not taking him," Jade shouted back, her voice echoing in the diner. "I don't care who you are, he is terrified of you." A tense, heavy silence blanketed the room. The men in leather cuts behind Reaper shifted, reaching into their jackets, waiting for a single nod from their president to forcefully remove the girl. But before Reaper could react, a small, trembling voice came from beneath the table. "Leave her alone." Malik slowly crawled out from under the booth. He stood up, his small fists clenched at his sides. He looked up at Reaper, his dark eyes, a mirror image of the man's, save for the color, filled with a mix of defiance and fear. Reaper's hardened expression instantly fractured. The dangerous, lethal biker president vanished, replaced for a fleeting second by a desperate, terrified father. He dropped to one knee right there on the dirty linoleum floor, completely ignoring Jade. "Malik," Reaper breathed out, his voice cracking. He reached out, his large gloved hands grasping the boy's shoulders. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you know what could have happened to you?" "I don't care," Malik mumbled, looking away. "I hate the new clubhouse. I hate the prospects. I want to go back to the old house. I want Mom." The mention of the boy's mother caused Reaper to flinch, as if he had been physically struck. His jaw tightened, and he pulled the boy into a fierce, crushing hug. Malik kept his arms stiff at his sides for a moment before finally giving in, burying his face in his father's leather cut and letting out a quiet sob. Jade watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding. The dynamic between them was complicated, steeped in grief, strict rules. and a heavy, suffocating kind of love. The man was undeniably dangerous, but he wasn't the monster Malik had made him out to be in his panic. He was just a grieving father who was terrifyingly overprotective. Reaper stood up, lifting Malik effortlessly into his arms. He turned back to Jade. The cold, assessing look had returned to his gray eyes. But there was something else there now. Curiosity, respect, perhaps? He gestured to one of his men, who immediately stepped forward, pulling a thick stack of $100 bills from his jacket pocket and dropping it onto the counter. It had to be at least $5,000. For the pie, Reaper said smoothly, and for keeping him safe. I don't want your money, Jade said firmly. Reaper paused at the door. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her tired face, her defiant posture, and the run-down diner around her. Keep it, Jade, he said, reading her name tag. Consider it a down payment on a debt I owe you. With that, the men swept out of the diner as quickly as they had arrived. The heavy glass door swung shut. The Harleys roared to life, and within seconds they vanished into the storm, leaving Jade alone in the quiet diner, a massive stack of cash sitting on the counter, and a profound sense of dread settling in her stomach. 3 days had passed since the night the bikers in leather took Malik away. Jade had tried to convince herself it was a bizarre, isolated incident, a strange dream born of sleep deprivation. She had locked the $5,000 in a small safe in her apartment, refusing to touch a single bill. Using that money felt like making a pact with the devil, but reality in the gritty Mechanicsville neighborhood rarely allowed for peace. It was Friday afternoon. The lunch rush had just ended, and Jade was wiping down the tables when the front door chimed. She didn't look up immediately, expecting Tony returning from his smoke break. We're just switching over to the dinner menu. Give me 1 second, Jade called out. Take your time, sweetheart. But time is money, and you're out of both. Jade froze. She slowly turned around. Standing in the center of the diner was Dwayne. He was a local loan shark and mid-level street enforcer who claimed the neighborhood as his territory. He was flanked by 2 of his goons, ugly men with bruised knuckles and cruel smiles. Dwayne was a vile man who wore too much cheap cologne and smiled like a crocodile. Jade's grandfather had unfortunately borrowed $10,000 from Dwayne's boss to keep the diner afloat during tough times. With the exorbitant interest rates, the debt had ballooned to $20,000, and Jade was drowning in it. Dwayne, Jade said, keeping her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the wet rag. I told you on the phone, I need 2 more weeks. The equipment repairs wiped out my cash flow. 2 weeks, Dwayne laughed, a harsh, scraping sound. He walked over to a booth and ran a finger over the vinyl seat, clicking his tongue. You see, Jade, my boss is getting impatient. He thinks maybe you don't respect him, and when people don't respect him, I have to come down here and teach them a lesson. Dwayne signaled to one of his men. The goon grinned, picked up a heavy wooden chair, and casually smashed it against the edge of the counter. The wood splintered loudly, sending shards flying across the floor. Jade jumped back, her heart leaping into her throat. Stop it! Are you crazy? I'll get you the money! She suddenly thought of the $5,000 in her safe. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I have $5,000. I can give it to you today. Dwayne's eyes glinted with malice. $5,000 is just the late fee, sweetheart. As for the rest... He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. He smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap rum. Maybe we can work out a different kind of arrangement. A pretty girl like you. It's a shame to see you waste away in this grease pit. He reached out, his dirty fingers grabbing a lock of her hair. Jade slapped his hand away violently. Don't touch me! Get out of my diner! Dwayne's face darkened with rage. You stupid little... He raised his hand, balling it into a heavy fist. Jade squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact, but the blow never came. Instead, a sickening crack echoed through the diner, followed by a wet, heavy thud. Jade opened her eyes. Dwayne was on the floor, groaning in agony, his nose visibly shattered, blood pouring down his face. Standing over him was a man in a black leather cut with the Hell Angels patch. But it wasn't Reaper. It was a man with slicked-back dark hair and cold, dead eyes, one of Reaper's brothers from the other night. Before Dwayne's two goons could even process what had happened, 3 more bikers in leather filtered into the diner. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency. Within 10 seconds, both goons were on their knees, their arms pinned painfully behind their backs, staring down the barrels of suppressed handguns. The diner fell dead silent, save for Dwayne's pathetic whimpering on the floor. Then the bell chimed again. Jack's Reaper Harlan stepped into the copper kettle. Today he wasn't wearing full riding gear. He wore a perfectly tailored black leather jacket that accentuated his broad shoulders. He looked effortlessly powerful, a king walking into a peasant's hovel. He didn't even look at the bleeding men on the floor, his icy gray eyes locked immediately onto Jade. He took in her pale face, her trembling hands, and the shattered chair on the floor. A dangerous dark shadow passed over his features. Reaper stepped over Dwayne's writhing body as if the man were nothing more than a puddle on the street. He stopped in front of Jade. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his baritone voice surprisingly gentle. "No," Jade stammered, her mind racing, trying to comprehend the sudden, violent shift in reality. What are you doing here?" Reaper finally looked down at Dwayne. "Vincent," Reaper said, not raising his voice. The man who had broken Dwayne's nose stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "Who does this trash work for?" "Some low-rent crew out of East Point," Vincent replied smoothly. Reaper nodded slowly. "Tell their boss he owes me a favor, and tell him if this piece of filth or any of his men ever step foot on Peachtree Street again, I will personally burn their hangout to the ground with them inside it. Drag them out." "Yes, Reaper," Vincent said. He grabbed Dwayne by the collar of his jacket and dragged the bleeding, terrified man out the front door, the other men following with the goons. Jade stood frozen. Reaper Harlan. The name echoed in her mind. She didn't follow biker gangs, but growing up in Atlanta, everyone knew the name Hell Angels. They were the ghost stories cops told each other. They were the untouchable club that ran the region from the shadows. "You're Jax Harlan," Jade breathed out, the realization making her knees weak. She had yelled at him. She had pushed him. She had fed his son leftover brisket. Reaper watched the realization wash over her face. He didn't look smug. He looked entirely indifferent to her fear. "I told you I owed you a debt, Jade." You didn't have to do that," Jade said, gesturing nervously to the blood on the floor. "I could have handled it." "He was going to hit you," Reaper stated plainly, as if that fact alone justified the brutal violence. He reached inside his jacket, pulling out a sleek black envelope, and placed it on the counter. "Your debt to those people is cleared. This diner is officially under Hell Angels protection. No one will ever bother you again." Jade stared at the envelope. "Why are you doing this?" "The money the other night was more than enough." Reaper sighed, a rare crack in his impenetrable armor. He looked around the diner, his gaze lingering on the booth where Malik had hidden. "My son hasn't spoken a word since I brought him home. He refuses to eat. He refuses to leave his room. The only thing he has asked for in 3 days is you." Jade's heart softened immediately at the thought of the sad, terrified little boy. "Malik, I don't trust outsiders," Reaper said, his voice hardening, his gray eyes piercing her. "I don't bring strangers into my clubhouse, but my son is grieving his mother, and I am failing to reach him. He trusts you. For whatever reason, You made him feel safe. Reaper took a step closer. The sheer magnetism and authority radiating from him were intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I am a man of vast resources, Jade. I can make your life exceptionally easy, or I can disappear and leave you to figure out this diner on your own. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I want you to come work for me at the compound, as Malik's private cook and caretaker. Jade's jaw practically hit the floor. You want me to be a nanny for the Hell Angels? Reaper's lip twitched, the faintest ghost of a smile. I want you to help my son. In exchange, I will pay you 10 times what this diner makes in a year. You keep the diner, hire a manager to run it, and you come live at the compound. And if I say no, Jade challenged, her innate stubbornness flaring up despite her fear. Reaper stepped back, adjusting his leather jacket. I don't force women to do things against their will. If you say no, I walk out that door, and you go back to serving cheap coffee. But Malik will still be waiting for you. He turned and walked towards the door. As he pulled the glass open, he looked back over his shoulder. The van will be waiting outside your apartment tomorrow morning at 8. Have a bag packed. The door chimed shut, leaving Jade alone with a shattered chair, a puddle of blood, and a choice that would drag her deep into the heart of the Hell Angels Motorcycle Club. The blacked-out van idling on the cracked pavement of Peachtree Street looked like a beast that had crash-landed in a junkyard. It was exactly 8 a.m. on Saturday. Jade stood on the sidewalk, clutching a faded canvas duffel bag that contained her entire life. She had spent the early hours of the morning frantically organizing the diner's ledger, handing the keys to a bewildered Tony, and promising him that her sudden catering opportunity was entirely legitimate. A man stepped out of the driver's side of the van. He wasn't Vincent, the man who had broken Dwayne's nose. This man was older, with salt and pepper hair and a thick build that stretched the seams of his leather cut. He walked around to the passenger side and opened the rear door. Miss Monroe, he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. I'm Lucas. Reaper sent me to collect you. Jade swallowed the lump in her throat and slid into the cavernous leather-scented interior. The door clicked shut with a heavy vault-like finality. As the van pulled away, Jade watched the faded awning of the copper kettle shrink in the rearview mirror. She was trading the only world she understood for one she didn't dare to fathom. The drive lasted 45 minutes, taking them away from the gritty urban sprawl of Atlanta and deep into the affluent, heavily wooded enclaves north of the city. The winding, tree-lined roads eventually gave way to a massive 10-foot-high wrought iron gate set into a formidable stone wall. Surveillance cameras tracked their approach. Lucas didn't even roll down his window. A scanner read the vehicle's encrypted tag, and the heavy gates swung open silently. Jade leaned forward, her breath catching. The Hell Angels compound wasn't just a house. It was a fortress masked as a sprawling modern compound. It sat on acres of manicured lawns surrounded by dense ancient oak trees that blocked any view from the main road. Men in leather cuts, at least half a dozen that Jade could spot, patrolled the perimeter, earpieces glowing faintly in the morning light. Lucas parked the van near the grand entrance, flanked by massive stone pillars. Leave your bag, Miss Monroe. The prospects will bring it to your quarters. Jade stepped out, feeling woefully underdressed in her simple jeans and knitted sweater. The massive double doors of the compound opened before she even reached the top of the steps. Standing in the foyer was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, her gray hair pulled into an immaculate bun. You must be Jade, the woman said, her tone polite but brisk. I am Mrs. Gable, the compound manager. Follow me, please. We have much to discuss. The interior of the house was breathtakingly cold. Dark hardwood floors, minimalist furniture that cost more than a small island, and brooding abstract paintings. There were no family photos, no warmth. It felt like a clubhouse, where no one was allowed to touch the exhibits. "Reaper is currently in a meeting in the West Wing," Mrs. Gable explained, as they walked down a long, sunlit corridor. "You are not to enter the West Wing under any circumstances. Your domain will be the kitchen, the informal dining room, and Master Malik's wing. You are permitted to use the grounds, provided you are accompanied by security." "Security?" Jade echoed, her stomach twisting. "To look at flowers?" Mrs. Gable stopped and turned, her expression unreadable. "You are in the Hell Angels compound now, Jade. Safety is not a luxury here. It is an active daily pursuit. Do not mistake this place for a normal home." Before Jade could process the chilling warning, a small, frantic blur of motion darted out from an adjacent room. "Jade!" Malik slammed into her legs, wrapping his arms around her waist with surprising force. He was wearing pristine pajamas, his dark hair messy from sleep. Jade immediately dropped to her knees, returning the fierce hug. The smell of expensive laundry detergent and little boy sweat filled her senses. "Hey there, Malik," she whispered, smoothing his hair back. "I told you I make a good cherry pie, didn't I?" Malik pulled back, his dark eyes wide and searching. "You really came. My dad said you were coming, but I didn't believe him. He lies sometimes." A low warning baritone echoed down the hall. Jade looked up. Reaper stood at the far end of the corridor, flanked by two men who looked like they broke bones for a living. He wore a crisp black t-shirt, no jacket, the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms inked with club tattoos. Even dressed down, the raw, intimidating power radiating from him commanded the entire room. He dismissed the men with a flick of his wrist and walked towards them. Mrs. Gable immediately stepped back, lowering her head in a sign of deep respect. "I see you made it, Jade," Reaper said, stopping a few feet away. His icy gray eyes swept over her, taking in her knelt position on the floor, holding his son. For a fraction of a second, a strange, vulnerable emotion flickered across his hardened face before he buried it under layers of stoic ice. "I'm here," Jade said, standing up and dusting off her knees, refusing to be intimidated by his presence. "But I need to know what my actual job is, Mr. Harlan. I am a cook, not a bodyguard." "Your job," Reaper said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr, "is to make sure my son eats, to make sure he smiles, to bring whatever it is you brought into that diner into this compound." He stepped closer, towering over her, "And in return, you get my protection. But make no mistake, Jade, you belong to this house now. You do not leave these gates without my explicit permission. Do you understand?" It wasn't a question. It was a command. Jade looked at Malik, who was clutching her hand tightly, his knuckles white. She looked back at Reaper, meeting the terrifying gaze of the most feared man in Atlanta. "I understand," Jade said firmly, "but I have rules too. If I'm cooking, I run the kitchen. No men with guns allowed while I'm baking. It ruins the soufflés." Reaper stared at her in stunned silence. For a moment, the air in the hallway grew suffocatingly tense. Then Jax Reaper Harlan threw his head back and let out a rich, genuine laugh that echoed off the walls. It was a sound that seemed to shock even Malik. "Deal," Reaper smirked, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "Welcome to the family, Jade." 2 weeks into her stay at the northern compound, Jade realized that the life of a biker president was less about glamorous rides and more about suffocating paranoia. Her days, however, had found a comfortable rhythm. She practically lived in the sprawling, state-of-the-art kitchen. Under her warmth and relentless patience, Malik had begun to thrive. He was no longer the terrified runaway shivering in the rain. He sat on the granite countertops, legs swinging, covered in flour, as Jade taught him how to knead pizza dough and temper chocolate. He ate voraciously, his cheeks finally gaining some color. Reaper was a ghost. She rarely saw him during the daylight hours. He would leave the compound in a pack of Harleys before dawn and return long after she and Malik had gone to sleep. But she felt his presence everywhere. The patched members watched her with silent reverence, fully aware that she held a bizarre, untouchable status in their president's eyes. It was a Tuesday night, a heavy thunderstorm reminiscent of the night she first met Malik, lashed against the reinforced glass windows of the compound. Jade couldn't sleep. The vast silence of the mansion was oppressive. Wrapping a thick robe over her pajamas, she padded barefoot down the carpeted hallway, heading towards the kitchen to heat up some milk. To get to the kitchen from her suite, she had to pass the heavy oak doors of the west wing, the forbidden zone. As she walked past, she noticed the doors were slightly ajar. A sliver of warm golden light spilled out onto the dark hardwood floor, accompanied by the low, urgent murmur of men's voices. Jade knew she should keep walking. Mrs. Gable's warning echoed in her mind. Safety is an active pursuit. But then she heard Reaper's voice laced with a venomous fury she had never heard before. "How the hell did the O'Connor crew know the shipment was coming into the South Atlanta port tonight?" Reaper snarled. The sound of glass shattering, a heavy tumbler thrown against a wall, made Jade jump. "We have a rat, boss," another voice replied. Jade recognized it as Vincent's cold, detached tone. "They hit the warehouse before our bikes even parked. 3 of our brothers are dead. Liam O'Connor is making a play for the docks. He thinks you're weak right now." "He thinks I'm distracted," Reaper corrected, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Because of Isabella." Jade froze, pressing her back against the cold wall outside the door. Isabella, Malik's mother. "Boss," Vincent said cautiously, "the police report still says her brakes failed. It was an accident." "It was no damn accident, and you know it," Reaper roared, the raw agony in his voice tearing through the air. "Liam O'Connor paid a mechanic to cut the lines on her Harley. He targeted my old lady to break me. And now someone inside this compound, someone in my inner circle, is feeding him our schedules." Jade pressed her hand over her mouth to muffle a gasp. The glamorous illusion of wealth shattered completely. Malik's mother had been murdered, and the killer's informant was walking the halls of this very compound. "Find the rat, Vincent," Reaper ordered, his voice devoid of all humanity. "Tear the club apart. Check offshore accounts, burner phones, everything. When you find out who sold Isabella out, bring them to me, breathing. I want to look them in the eyes before I end them. Understood?" But footsteps began to approach the oak doors. Panic seized Jade. If Vincent caught her eavesdropping on club business, not even Malik's affection could save her. She turned to run, her bare feet slipping slightly on the polished hardwood. She didn't make it 3 steps before the heavy oak door swung open completely. "Stop right there." It wasn't Vincent. It was Reaper. Jade froze in her tracks, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She slowly turned around. Reaper stood in the doorway, the golden light from his office casting him in dark, imposing shadows. He had discarded his jacket, and a shoulder holster was strapped over his black t-shirt, a heavy black pistol resting against his ribs. He looked like the devil himself, beautiful, terrifying, and dangerously angry. He gestured for Vincent to leave. The enforcer slipped past Jade without a word, disappearing down the hall like a ghost. Reaper closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He grabbed Jade by the upper arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to paralyze her, and pulled her into his office, kicking the heavy oak doors shut behind them. The room smelled of expensive whiskey, old leather, and rain. Reaper backed her up against a massive mahogany bookshelf, caging her in with his arms resting on the shelves on either side of her head. "How much did you hear?" he demanded, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled of bourbon, his eyes turbulent storms of gray. Nothing, Jade stammered, shrinking back against the books. I was just going to the kitchen for a glass of milk. I swear, Reaper. It was the first time she had used his road name. It slipped out in a panic. Reaper's gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before snapping back to her eyes. Do not lie to me, Jade. Not in this room. Not about this. I heard about the docks, she confessed, her voice shaking. I heard about the O'Connor crew. And I heard about your wife. Reaper flinched. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a profound, agonizing exhaustion that made him look a decade older. He dropped his arms and took a step back, running a hand through his dark hair. You shouldn't have heard that, he muttered, turning his back to her and walking over to a crystal decanter on his desk. He poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid and downed it in one gulp. I'm sorry, Jade said softly, the fear fading, replaced by a sudden, fierce wave of empathy. I didn't know she was murdered. Malik must never know the truth, Reaper snapped, gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. He turned to face her. The vulnerability laid bare. This world, it infects everything it touches. I tried to keep Isabella clean. I tried to build a fortress for them. But in this life, your enemies don't aim for your armor. They aim for your heart. He looked at Jade, his intense gaze sweeping over her soft, oversized robe and her messy, sleep-tousled hair in the brutal, bloody reality of his world. She was a glaring anomaly. She was pure, untested, and terrifyingly fragile. You are in danger here, Reaper said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. If O'Connor finds out about you, finds out that Malik cares for you, he will use you to get to me. I'm not leaving him, Jade said instantly. The words surprised even her, but they were true. She had fallen in love with the little boy who just wanted to eat cherry pie in the rain. I won't abandon Malik. He's lost too much already. Reaper stared at her, deeply moved by her fierce loyalty. The distance between them seemed to evaporate. He crossed the room slowly, stopping right in front of her. He reached out, his calloused, dangerous hand gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was burning hot against her cool skin. You are too brave for your own good, Jade Monroe, he murmured, his thumb grazing her cheekbone. The tension in the air shifted violently from fear to an undeniable electric pull. Jade's breath hitched. She looked up into his eyes, seeing the ruthless biker president and the grieving, desperate father warring within the same man. She knew she should step away. She knew playing with fire in the Hell Angels compound would leave her burned alive. But as he leaned in closer, the scent of leather and whiskey surrounding her, she found she couldn't move an inch. The space between them crackled with an undeniable, terrifying gravity. Reaper's lips were mere inches from Jade's, his breath warming her skin, the scent of expensive bourbon and leather intoxicating her senses. For a fractured second, the ruthless president of the Hell Angels vanished entirely, leaving only a man starved for light in a world suffocated by darkness. But then the heavy grandfather clock in the corridor chimed, striking 2 a.m. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet office. Reaper's jaw clenched, the vulnerability in his gray eyes shattered, instantly icing over with the familiar, brutal discipline that kept him alive. He dropped his hand from her cheek and took a sharp step backward, putting a safe, cold distance between them. Go back to bed, Jade, Reaper said, his voice a harsh, ragged rasp. He turned away, bracing his hands on his mahogany desk. And forget what you heard tonight, for your own survival. Jade didn't argue. Her heart was beating so hard she felt bruised from the inside out. She pulled her robe tighter around her shoulders and practically fled the office, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind her, sealing him back in his world of violence and ghosts. Over the next 4 days, the northern compound felt like a powder keg, waiting for a match. Reaper doubled the security detail. The men in leather cuts patrolled the perimeter with restless, aggressive energy, assault rifles now slung openly over their shoulders. Vincent moved through the halls like a shadow, interrogating lower-level members and tearing through financial records to find the rat who had sold out Isabella Harlan and the South Atlanta port shipment. Through it all, Jade kept her head down and focused entirely on Malik. The kitchen became their sanctuary. She taught the 7-year-old how to make fresh linguine from scratch, laughing as flour coated his nose on the granite countertops. For a few hours a day, the fortress felt like a real home. On Thursday afternoon, the pale southern sun broke through the clouds. Jade decided they needed fresh air. With a wicker basket over her arm, she led Malik out the heavy glass patio doors towards the compound's sprawling greenhouse to pick fresh basil and heirloom tomatoes for a marinara sauce. They were accompanied by Lucas, the older, heavily built driver, who had first brought Jade to the compound. Lucas always seemed grandfatherly and quiet, standing by the glass doors of the greenhouse, with his hands clasped behind his back, letting Jade and Malik have their peace. The greenhouse was a humid, fragrant jungle of green vines and rich, damp earth. Malik ran ahead, disappearing behind a row of tall, leafy tomato plants, his giggles echoing off the glass panes. Jade smiled, reaching down to snip a cluster of basil leaves. As she did, she heard the faint, muffled sound of a voice. She paused. It wasn't Malik. She crept closer to the edge of the foliage, peering through a gap in the thick ferns. Lucas was standing near the side exit of the greenhouse, a cheap plastic burner phone pressed tightly to his ear. He was speaking in a low, rushed whisper, his eyes darting nervously towards the main house. "I'm telling you, Liam, the timing is now," Lucas muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "The boss is tearing the club apart, looking for the leak. Vincent is getting too close to my bank accounts. I need extraction." Jade froze. Liam O'Connor, the rival biker boss who had murdered Reaper's wife. "I have the Hell Angels kid right now," Lucas continued, his voice dropping to a sinister pitch that made Jade's blood run cold. "Just him and the cook. They're in the glass house. The cameras on the south perimeter along the tree line are looped for the next 10 minutes. Send the van to the access road off Route 400. I'll bring the boy to you. He's your ultimate leverage against Reaper." A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over Jade. Lucas, the trusted driver, the man who had been with the Hell Angels for a decade. He was the rat, and he was about to hand a 7-year-old boy over to a monster. Survival instinct, raw and absolute, overrode Jade's panic. She didn't scream. She slowly backed away from the ferns, her bare feet making no sound on the damp stone path. She found Malik crouching near a row of bell peppers, examining a ladybug on his finger. "Malik," Jade whispered, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. She knelt down, grabbing his small shoulders. "We're going to play a game, the quiet game. I need you to crawl under these metal planting tables and go all the way to the back wall. Do not make a sound. Do not come out until your father or I tell you it's safe." Malik looked at her, his dark eyes widening as he recognized the fear etched into her features. He had grown up in this world. He knew what that look meant. Without a word, the boy dropped to his hands and knees and scrambled beneath the heavy steel tables, vanishing into the deep shadows of the foliage. Jade stood up, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She needed a weapon. She frantically scanned the greenhouse, her eyes landing on a heavy iron pair of pruning shears resting on a wooden potting bench. She grabbed them, the cold metal heavy and grounding in her sweating palms. "Miss Monroe." Lucas's voice drifted through the humid air. He sounded deceptively calm. "Time to head back inside. Reaper wants the perimeter locked down. Jade stepped out from behind the tomato vines, hiding the heavy iron shears behind the folds of her apron. She forced her face into a mask of mild confusion. "Already?" she called back. "Malik just wanted to find a few more peppers." Lucas's grandfatherly facade cracked. His hand dropped to the holster at his waist, unsnapping the leather retention strap. He stepped into the aisle, his eyes coldly scanning the empty space around her. "Where is the boy, Jade?" he asked, drawing his 9mm pistol and pointing it loosely in her direction. "Don't make this difficult. Liam O'Connor just wants to have a conversation with his father. The kid won't be hurt if you cooperate." "You murdered his mother," Jade snarled, the fear instantly evaporating, replaced by a maternal feral rage that shocked her. She tightened her grip on the iron shears. "You cut the brakes on Isabella's bike." Lucas sighed, looking genuinely regretful. "Isabella was collateral damage. Business is business. O'Connor pays in millions. Hell Angels pays in loyalty. Loyalty doesn't fund my retirement in Boca. Now, I'm going to ask you one last time. Where is the boy?" He raised the gun, aiming it directly at Jade's chest. "Go to hell," Jade spat. In a split second, Jade lunged. She didn't run away. She threw herself forward, hurling a heavy terracotta pot full of wet soil directly at Lucas's head. The heavy clay shattered against Lucas's shoulder, sending him staggering backward with a grunt of pain. The gun went off, a deafening, ear-shattering crack inside the glass structure. The bullet grazed Jade's upper arm, burning like a hot iron, and shattered a pane of glass behind her. Jade didn't stop. Running on pure adrenaline, she closed the distance and swung the heavy iron pruning shears with all her might, striking Lucas hard across the wrist. Lucas screamed, dropping the pistol. But he was a man who had survived 30 years in the biker world. He backhanded Jade across the face with his good hand. The sheer force of the blow sent her flying backward into a wooden planting rack. Wooden planks and bags of fertilizer collapsed on top of her in a cloud of blinding dust. Jade gasped for air, her vision swimming, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. She tried to push the debris off, but her injured arm screamed in agony. Lucas retrieved his gun from the dirt, his face twisted in a mask of pure, ugly rage. Blood dripped from his shattered wrist. "Stupid little waitress," he spat, cocking the hammer of the pistol. "I'll find the brat myself after I put a bullet in your head." He aimed the barrel directly between Jade's eyes. "Jade!" Malik screamed, breaking his hiding spot and running out from under the tables, his tiny face streaked with tears. "Malik, no, run!" Jade shrieked. Jade. Before Lucas could pivot his weapon towards the child, the heavy glass doors of the greenhouse practically exploded inward. A hail of suppressed gunfire shredded the humid air. 3 bullets struck Lucas square in the chest in a tight, perfectly executed cluster. The traitor's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into the dirt, dead before his body hit the ground. Through the lingering smoke and shattered glass, Jack's Reaper Harlan stepped into the greenhouse. He didn't look like a club president today. He looked like the Grim Reaper. His leather jacket was gone, his t-shirt straining against his chest. A smoking Sig Sauer clutched in his hand. Vincent and 3 heavily armed brothers poured in behind him, instantly securing the exits and clearing the perimeter. "Dad!" Malik sobbed, running across the dirt path. Reaper dropped to one knee, wrapping his free arm around his son, crushing the boy to his chest. He buried his face in Malik's dark hair, his massive shoulders heaving with a suppressed, ragged breath, but his terrifying gray eyes were locked entirely on Jade. Jade weakly pushed a bag of potting soil off her legs, clutching her bleeding shoulder. She looked at the dead man on the floor, then up at Reaper. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaking shock. Reaper handed Malik off to Vincent. "Get him to the safe room now." He crossed the greenhouse in long, urgent strides, dropping to his knees beside Jade in the dirt. He holstered his weapon and reached for her, his large hands frantically checking her for fatal wounds when he saw the blood soaking the sleeve of her sweater. A dark, murderous shadow passed over his features. "I'm okay," Jade choked out, leaning into his touch despite herself. "It just grazed me. He was going to take Malik to O'Connor." "I know," Reaper gritted out, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly close to fear. "Vincent found the offshore accounts 10 minutes ago. We realized the perimeter cameras were dead. Got Jade when I heard the gunshot." He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, Jack's Reaper, Harlan, the untouchable, ruthless king of the southern underworld, did something no one had ever seen him do. He gently gathered the bleeding, exhausted diner cook into his arms, lifting her off the damp earth and holding her against his chest as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the world. "You protected my son?" Reaper whispered fiercely against her hair as he carried her out of the shattered greenhouse. "You took a bullet for my blood." Jade rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the heavy, frantic beating of his heart. She had entered this compound as an outsider, a favor to pay off a debt. But as Reaper carried her through the fortress of armed men who parted for them with deep, silent reverence, she realized the terrifying truth. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She had spilled blood for the Hell Angels, and Jack's Reaper Harlan would burn the entire city of Atlanta to ash before he let anyone touch her again. The line between a normal life and the dark, seductive underworld had just been shattered for Jade. If you are completely hooked by Jade's fearless protection of Malik and the intense, undeniable burning chemistry between her and the dangerous Reaper Harlan, you cannot miss what happens next. The war with the O'Connor Syndicate has officially begun, and Jade is now at the very center of a bloody biker feud. Will Reaper's ruthless lifestyle ultimately destroy her, or will she become the undisputed queen of his empire? Hit that like button if your heart was racing during that greenhouse showdown. Share this gripping story with your fellow romance and drama lovers, and absolutely subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you are the first to know when Part 8 drops. You won't believe the twists we have coming up.